Yo, party people. Okay, so this is November 30th, number 2. Okay, so we're just at the beginning of chapter 23. So now I just left off in the last video. If you have not seen the last video, go back and see it because there's a lot of good stuff in here. Historically, it's important to understand what's going on here when they're bringing Jesus to kill Jesus, or to try and kill Jesus. Jesus gave up his life. Okay, gave up his spirit. So it says here, verse 6, when Pilate heard of Galilee, he asked if the man were a Galilean. So they're now, because they did not, the priests and the Levites did not succeed in the first attempt to get Jesus killed by manipulating Pilate. Now they're bringing up Galilee. He stirs up trouble and beginning from Galilee to this place because Pilate and his military had been involved in an uprising in Galilee. There's a lot of historical information about that, and basically his soldiers had overreacted. There had been death, and so it had caused great controversy within the area that Pilate was ruling. And so the priests now are trying to manipulate him by saying that Jesus is a Galilean. Oh my gosh, he's part of that Galilean group that caused all that trouble for you. We don't want any more trouble for you, Pilate. That kind of thing, right? So they're trying to manipulate. So verse 6 says, when Pilate heard of Galilee, he asked Jesus if he were a Galilean. And as soon as he knew that he belonged to Herod's jurisdiction, he sent him to Herod, who was also in Jerusalem at that time. So as I mentioned at the end of the last video, the language that's used here, there's a legal term that's used where Pilate is actually showing deference to Herod by referring him to a higher court. So he's recognizing that he's trying to be that they're trying to manipulate him to kill this guy. He's completely not understanding why, but Pilate is bound by the strict laws of the Romans, right? So he's like, all right, you want to kill this guy? I'm going to send him to a higher court. So not only is he sending him to a higher court, but he's also sending him to a Jew, someone that he would consider Jewish, but the Jewish people might not consider Jewish. All right. And so he sends him to Herod and to see what Herod would have him do. So because he's under Herod's jurisdiction, a higher court. So he sent him to Herod, who was also in Jerusalem at that time. Now, when Herod saw Jesus, he was exceedingly glad, for he had desired for a long time to see him, because he had heard many things about him, and he hoped to see some miracle done by him. Okay, so how lame is that? It's like he's looking for a sideshow. I mean, that shows how earthly and not focused on God Herod is at all, even though he's building the temple, right? Then he questioned him with many words, but he answered him nothing. So Jesus already has been proclaimed innocent, right, by Pilate. So, he's not, and there's probably other reasons he's not answering Herod. So then he questioned him with many words, and Jesus answered him nothing. And the chief priests and scribes stood and vehemently accused him. Okay, so another interesting thing here is that unlike Pilate is more afraid of the scribes and the Pharisees and the religious leaders than Herod. Herod has no respect for them. He's living in sin. He killed a prophet. He killed John the Baptist. He has zero respect for him. So one of the commentaries I read said that when Pilate sent Jesus to Herod, the priests about lost their mind because they knew that they had like zero influence or ability to manipulate Herod. So then it says he hoped to see some miracles. And then the chief priests and scribes stood and vehemently accused him. Then Herod, with his men of war, treated Jesus with contempt and mocked him, arrayed him in a gorgeous robe, and sent him back to Pilate. That very day, Pilate and Herod became friends with each other, for previously they had been at enmity with each other. So they had fought before. So what's that saying? So he was not accused by Herod either. So he was found innocent by Herod, and that's why it shows the priests screaming and being so, anxious, trying to get an accusation, trying to get him condemned. But so Pilate didn't condemn him, and now Herod didn't condemn him. So then it says chapter 13 or verse 13. Then Pilate, when he had called together the chief priests, the rulers, and the people, said to them, "You have brought this man to me as one who misleads the people, and indeed, having examined him in your presence, I have found no fault in this man concerning those things of which you accuse him. And no, neither did Herod. For I sent you back to him, and indeed nothing deserving of death has been done by him, by Jesus. I will therefore chastise him and release him, for it was necessary for him to release one to them at the feast." And they all cried out all at once, saying, "Away with this man, and release to us Barabbas, who had been thrown into prison for a certain rebellion made in the city, and for murder." So there's also the belief that this Barabbas is actually some kind of a title, that they think that he could have been related to someone in the Sanhedrin, which would have given them more impetus to try and get him released through his political influence, right, through his family. So they're trying to get this guy released who had ties to the ruling religious class. Pilate, therefore, wishing to release Jesus, again called out to them, but they shouted, saying, "Crucify him, crucify him." Then he said to them the third time, "Why? What evil has he done? I have found no reason for death in him. I will therefore chastise him and let him go." But they were insistent, demanding with loud voices that he be crucified. And the voices of these men and of the chief priests prevailed. So when you see, and the voices of these men and of the chief priests prevailed, that shows you that there was an attempt to manipulate again by the chief priests. So here they're trying to manipulate Pilate. They're trying to manipulate. They have no control over Herod. And now they're stirring up the people. So all of the people that were in the crowd were not wanting Jesus to be crucified, but the chief priests made sure that the people they paid or whatever made sure that their voices were heard. But there were obviously people in there that did not want that, because it said these men, right? It doesn't say all the people. It says these men. So Pilate gave sentence that it should be as they requested, and he released to them the one they requested, who for rebellion and murder had been thrown into prison, but he delivered Jesus to their will. So he gave in, and he was not following the law. So when I talk about all the different places in the Bible where you see nations falling apart, that when we're studying First and Second Chronicles and the nation is falling apart, you see all of this injustice. You see people using the law and perverting the law to further themselves and their wicked schemes and stuff like that. And God hates that. And here you see the exact same thing happening to Jesus himself. So those of you that are in those positions, just recognize you know, please do what is honorable and do what is right, no matter what the cost, because God's eyes are on you, and the people are relying on you. Now verse 26, as they led him away and laid hold of a certain man, Simon, a Cyrenian, who was coming from the country, and on him they laid the cross that he might bear it after Jesus. So Jesus is needing help carrying the cross. Verse 27, and a great multitude of the people followed him, and women who also mourned and lamented him. But Jesus, turning to them, said, "Daughters of Jerusalem, do not weep for me, but weep for yourselves and for your children. For indeed the days are coming in which they will say, 'Blessed are the barren wombs that never bore, and breasts which never nursed.' Then they will begin to say to the mountains, 'Fall on us,' and to the hills, 'Cover us.' For if they do these things in the green wood, what will be done in the dry?" So Jesus is referring to the fall of Jerusalem, but also future prophetic stuff, right? Kind of like we were talking about in Isaiah. Isaiah was declaring prophetic visions that he saw of the fall of Jerusalem at that time when the southern kingdom was going to fall, but also end time pictures, right? So same thing here. And when he says, "For if they do these things in the greenwood, what will be done in the dry?" So they're doing these things out in the open to innocent people. What will they do when there's, they will definitely do this to everybody. 32 says, there were also two others, criminals, led with him to be put to death. And when they had come to the place called Calvary, there they crucified him, and the criminals, one on the right hand and the other on the left. Then Jesus said, Father, forgive them, for they do not know what they do. And they divided his garments and cast lots, and the people stood looking on, but even the rulers with them sneered, saying, He saved others, let him save himself, if he is the Christ, the chosen of God. The soldiers also mocked him, coming and offering him sour wine, and saying, If you are the king of the Jews, save yourself. And an inscription also was written over him in letters of Greek, Latin, and Hebrew, This is the King of the Jews. Then one of the criminals who were hanged blasphemed him, saying, If you are the Christ, save yourself and us. But the other answering rebuked him, saying, Do you not even fear God, seeing you are under the same condemnation? And we indeed justly, for we receive the due reward of our deeds. But this man has done nothing wrong. Then he said to Jesus, Lord, remember me when you come into your kingdom. And Jesus said to him, Assuredly I say to you, today you will be with me in paradise. Okay, so I'm out of time. I'm going to do one more. Okay, so hold tight for number 3. Read your Bible. Jesus is coming. Peace.